Okay, so we're going to just look at how you enter data into SPSS. This is fairly straightforward, and I think probably most of you have done this before, probably familiar with it, but it's just worthwhile going through some of the little pointers because there are a few complexities. Well, you'll see what I mean, hopefully. Okay, so the first thing that you'll see when you open SPSS, if you've decided to enter data rather than open the data set, is this screen here. We have a bunch of numbers down the left hand side and down the rows, and on the columns we have the word var. Now one of the things that confuses people sometimes about SPSS is actually it has two ways of viewing the screen. Currently we're in data view, which you can see down here, which is the mode in which we enter data. The other one is variable view. If I click on that, now what's confusing about this to people sometimes is that the rows become columns and the columns become rows. So if we look at this here, this is variable 1 here, but when we go into variable view, variable 1 is now across here. So the rows become columns, the columns become rows. So let's go back to data view. Now one of the ways in which I think helps people to understand how to enter data is when you first get to this sheet here, this screen here, think of the numbers coming down here as people. So this is participant 1, participant 2, participant 3, and then these are measurements, the columns are measurements that are taken of these people, or if you like, variables. So person 1, this variable may be, their age, this may be their gender, and this may be some dependent variable that you're interested in finding out about. Okay, so let's imagine we've got a simple study here. We've got a within participants design, and what we're simply interested in is whether people's serotonin levels change throughout the day. So we imagine we measure somebody's serotonin levels in the morning after they just got up, and then we measure them sometime in the evening. So we're taking two measurements of each person. So what we can do is go back to variable view here. The first thing is the name. Now this again can be a bit tricky. SPSS is not the most user-friendly program in the world. It's important not to fear it, but it's important to respect it. It can be a little bit of a diva. In other words, it can be very fussy about the kind of data that you can put in it. So if you imagine we want to say the first variable is the serotonin measured in the morning, if we want to try typing in the morning like that and hit OK, then SPSS complains, right? Diva-ish. Variable name contains an illegal character. That's because I put spaces in it. It also doesn't like it if you enter words that are too long. So try to avoid spaces, try to keep it to one word if you possibly can. So if you call this morning, then SPSS should accept that, okay? And then this one is evening. That's good. Now if we go across this column here, we've got a lot of information here, most of which we don't need to bother with. The first is the type of variable. And it's a numeric variable. There are various different kinds of variables that you can have in SPSS. Commas, dots, scientific. I mean, basically, I don't think I've ever used anything other than a numeric variable. So ignore that. Keep it. It defaults to that. Width is basically the width of the column there, how wide this is. How many decimal places. You don't need to bother with these things really most of the time. The only one that you might need to bother with is this thing label. Well, there's a few others which we'll bother with later, but just for the moment, for this particular example, is label. This is where if you were unsatisfied by just typing in morning and you wanted something a little bit more descriptive, say for example you wanted to do a graph and you wanted to label your X and Y axes more clearly, you could type in there serotonin levels in the morning, whatever. And then the same with that evening, and that will make sure it's clearly labelled, and that can be used sometimes. But for the moment, we'll ignore that because that's not that important. Okay, so let's go back to data view, and what we can see now is that these rows have now become columns. We've now got the first variable, the first measurement is morning, and the second one is evening. So participant 1's measurement in the morning is, let's say, 32. I'm making these numbers up, and participant 1's measurement in the evening is 45, so it's gone up, and then we can just enter whatever data we want in here, like this. Okay, so that is basically a simple way of entering data for a within subjects design. Okay, so keep in mind these are people, these are measurements. Let's imagine we have a different design here. So let's delete all this stuff. We have a different design. The design we have, in fact, what you might want to do, you notice here, just as an aside, you might not be able to notice this, but sometimes SPSS has little dots in the boxes when you delete things. That can cause problems, so quite often the best way to do it is to select all of this, like that, and go to edit and just say clear, and that gets rid of all the stuff. So it's best to clear it so you've got a nice fresh screen each time. So let's get rid of these, because we don't need these anymore. Having difficulty getting rid of these. Let's go back again. Let's go in here, edit, clear. That's gone. Okay, so we've got rid of them. Again, it's a bit of a diva. You've got to go with the way it likes things to be done. So let's imagine we've got a different study now. Instead of looking at a within subject study, where we're looking at changes over time, we've got a between participant study. Let's keep it simple. We imagine it's some kind of drug study in which we are comparing the effects of a drug treatment with a placebo condition. Each person is randomly assigned to one of two groups, either the drug treatment or the placebo condition. Okay. Again, we might rush ahead and start saying, okay, what we've got is drug and placebo, like that. Okay, great. Let's get back here and let's start entering our data in. Okay, like that. Of course, this happens a lot. Students kind of often want to get on with entering the data, want to get the analysis done. Always helps to stop, sit back, think, okay, these are people, these are variables or measurements taken of that person. So what we've got here is actually the wrong kind of design. Remember, this is supposed to be a between participants design, comparing the effects of drug treatment versus placebo. Between participants mean that each person is only subject to one of the two experimental conditions, or put another way, one of the two levels of the variable. But actually this is showing that person 1 has the drug treatment and the placebo treatment. So this is incorrect. What we're entering here is a within subject design, not a between subject design. So let's again go back to variable view, fussy, edit, clear, get rid of all that stuff. What we want to have is person 1 is one of the variables is what level of the independent variable is that person subjected to. So we want person 1 to be in condition 1 and their score is whatever their score is. Person 2 is in condition 2, say, and whatever their score is. So how do we do that? Well, what we need to do is to set up what is called a coding variable. And this is one of the little funny wrinkles that SPSS has and one of its little awkwardnesses, but once you get used to it, it's fairly straightforward. So if we just can call this condition, it likes that, that's good. And then we can simply say, we imagine what the drug treatment is about. Let's just say it's on well-being. Well-being. Okay, and again, one word because SPSS don't like spaces. Right, what we want to do now is to set up a variable which tells us which condition a person was in. So what we need to do is to go to this little column here called values. Not necessarily that obvious. And what we want to do here is to simply assign a label to a number. Why do we need to assign a label to a number? SPSS, as I keep repeating, is a fussy thing. It doesn't really like you putting words in there. It doesn't like words at all. So any words that you might want to enter, male, female, drug treatment versus placebo, needs to be associated with a number, because if you don't put a number in, SPSS largely ignores what you've got there. So we need to associate with a number. That's straightforward. We can say a value is 1 and we can call that drug treatment. Okay. Now what you might be tempted to do here is to say okay, but the problem with this is SPSS doesn't like that, and if you do okay, then nothing happens. So it's important at this point to remember, and inevitably I forget, to click add. And that's showing you here in this box here that the number 1 is associated with the level of the variable drug or the condition drug. Simply 2, the numbers don't matter. The numbers could be anything you want, just as long as the numbers are different, but usually we go 1, 2, 3 depending on how many levels of the variable there are. So level value 2 is placebo. We add that, and now we're ready. We've added everything. So once we've added everything and it's all in this little box here, we can click OK. This is well-being. This is a numeric variable, so we can leave that as it is, because that's just entering a number in the same way that we entered the number in the previous example. So now we've got condition versus well-being. Now notice here, again, you might not be able to see this on your screen, there are two little dots in here. So I don't want those. They can mess things up. I should just get rid of them. Okay, so condition. So let's say person 1 is in condition 1. Okay, and their well-being score was 24. Okay, person 2, let's say, was in condition 2, which is placebo, and their well-being score was, I don't know, 48, for example. Don't know what this well-being score is. I'm making these numbers up. I'm just trying to show you the general principles here. Usually when you enter these, you wouldn't do drug placebo drug in some kind of random order. Usually we kind of line it up so all the drugs are together, all the ones, and all the placebos are together. That just makes it clear to us looking at it what's going on, and it's good to organize your data sometimes in SPSS, because it can, if you've got things kind of scattered all around, it can look confusing. But just for the purposes of this, I'm just trying to make it simple here. There's a little button up here. If you can see the mouse up here, there's a little button on the top here on this little ribbon which has got like an arrow with A and 1. This is a really useful thing which a lot of people don't notice, but if you click on that, it reverts to the numbers. So just to show that SPSS likes numbers, so we've entered 1 in here and 2 in here, and because we've associated 1 with drug and 2 with placebo, then clicking on this puts the words in. But it's important to notice these aren't words. Okay, if you just tried entering words in there, drug and placebo, SPSS would not be able to do anything with that information. Okay, we can actually even do that. It doesn't like it at all. Okay, so that's basically the setting up of the data. The important things to remember here is, I think the most important thing is thinking of these as being participants, thinking of these as being measurements of the participant. Think through the design. Is each person being measured more than once, or is each person in an independent group? If a person's in an independent group, then you need to set up a coding variable to tell SPSS which group that is. If the person is being measured twice, then it's legitimate to have two variables, as we saw at the beginning. The other thing to remember is just a slight confusion when you go from variable view to data view, in that columns become rows and rows become columns. Okay, so that really is it for this point, and there'll be other more advanced tutorials coming up later.